All right, we are recording for Chapter 5 of Password is Courage. This is a somewhat interesting chapter, but before getting into it, interesting as far as how it is constructed and what all it's telling, because it's a bit more abstract. But anyway, something that occurred to me after I finished the recording for Chapter 4, and it's also true here, is a lot of these chapters, well, I think every chapter has ended, not necessarily on a cliffhanger, but some sort of point of tension, you some kind of hook to keep you reading. And so you really need it. I guess it may help with some, but it is still an interesting story regardless. And that's definitely also the case here, and I will talk about that. And maybe I'll spoil what happens in the next chapter. I don't know. I'll decide when I get there. But yeah, so this chapter is different and a little bit more abstract. As I said, it has a different mood to it in that we're not getting the specifics of like, what did you do this day, what did you do that day, or this has happened and now we're going through what all that involved. No, it's like potentially spanning months. Actually, I think it would have to be months because the actually, wait, no, maybe it is years, because he was a POW first in 1940, and the ending of the chapter I know is in 42. And that's true. There's also an event that it gives as happening in spring of 41. And hang on, let me just... Yeah, so it would be used then. It would be used then. Because the event that's at the end was, maybe some people recognize this, August 19th, 1942. It's an interesting date. Anyway. But really what the bulk of the chapter is focusing on is life as a POW and how it's horrible. It truly is, and not just in the you're a prisoner kind of way. I mean, although that does still kind of cover it, but the whole, it is soul crushing, and it even makes the point. I'm going to say it in my own way that some may disagree with. My apologies. When you choose to enlist to go to war, there's going to be a part of you that hopes to be a hero, and certainly be a hero and come back. But you can still, while thinking about that, while playing that, while mentally preparing yourself, you can accept the fact that you might not be coming back intact. Like, you can accept you are going to be injured. But it's still, if you are wounded, you can accept that. You know what happened. You stepped on a mine, so you lost a leg. You got shot badly in an arm, or a grenade went off, and so you've lost part of an arm. Or maybe you've lost multiple limbs. Maybe you've lost a part of your internal organs, such. It's like, it's possible to prepare yourself for that. And it's also, when it does happen to you, you know what has happened to you. You know what harm has been caused to your body, and potentially by what. But the wound, if you will, of being a prisoner is very different. Because it just goes on and on and on. It is, as it is described in there, soul crushing. This is where I have the Kobo. So, yeah, I mean, it's a different experience than what some may expect going in, and not all may get through it. It actually describes 2 different suicides in there, and does state that, yeah, suicides definitely happened, and not uncommonly. Especially for a larger camp. Lambsdorff is mentioned at one point as in 43, I think it said it had 12,000 POWs in it. Now, it does describe them as British POWs at that time, but this, in another location, how it lists them, would be British and British Commonwealth. So it's not just those from Britain, but you'd also have Indian, Australian, South African, Canadian, Sikhs were mentioned. Some Arabs. I'm trying to remember if I mentioned Africans. May have. Like Northern Africa. Anyway. But from all over. Because they were part of the British Commonwealth, they were there. Or in some cases, like I think it even mentioned Free French and Foreign Legionnaires. But people who came to join the British Army to fight in this war. That you had all those people there. So in such a large group, yeah, you are going to have people that they can't make it anymore. Yeah, I'll get to what the suicides are a little later, because I do want to talk about them a little bit. in kind of sort of specifics. I don't want to be too specific. Um, Actually, no. Hey, let me see this. Even though there is some detail here, this is not. I mean, it's definitely an appropriate story for somebody in high school. At least when I was in high school. Middle school, maybe. I'm just thinking because it's not any worse. In fact, one of the suicides, what's described there, is very much what is depicted in The Great Escape. Oh, I can't remember his name. Here's one guy who he just snaps, and he does do something that he's killed. It's essentially suicide by Kraut. I'm sorry, I get that Kraut is technically a slur in this context, but it is one of those things where it's like it kind of I think it just carries off the tongue. It flows off the tongue better than suicide by German or suicide by Nazi or suicide by guard. But it is essentially suicide by cop. But it's the German soldiers, German guards there. But yeah, so I do just want to make that point that it's even with the light detail in there. I don't think this is inappropriate because this is part of history, and as I said, it's in The Great Escape. I think that has a PG rating. It does predate PG-13, but still, it's PG. Before getting into that stuff, though, I do want to mention, because it does give some talks about, like what it is that caused some of the suicides, caused some of the depression. Because it wasn't just the whole day after day of the monotony being a prisoner, so you're not free to do what you want. And also, in some cases, you couldn't do the things that you would normally want to do to pass the time. Like it even mentions, if you were lucky and you were good with your hands and working with wood, if you were lucky, you'd have a guard give you a knife so that you could just carve wood, and that's it. And it's like, I am sure in a situation like that, even if somebody's like, can I have that? I want to escape. I could believe some people would be like, no. And you know what? You'd respect that and you'd just walk away. Because that is a lifeline for the person. That is keeping them sane. Okay? And I can also believe that would be part of the reason why some of the Germans would be willing to give a prisoner a knife. I mean, sort of like in Shawshank Redemption, the hammer. What does he actually refer to it as? Because it's a specific name. I just can't remember it. But that there potentially were people that realized that he had that, and it's like, yeah, he shouldn't, but you know what? It's good for his mental health in that case, and it's not really a danger. We'll tolerate it. But there was also the letters from home, which the fact that the mail was very inconsistent, where you could write a letter that's like, I want a quick response. It might be a year before you get a response back, because it could take that long for your letter to get there and then for the response to come back. At the same time, though, you could also have nothing, and then suddenly a basket of letters arrive for you. Yeah. And does mention things like the Dear John kind of stuff, or where you, not just it's broken, where like a relationship is broken off, but where, no, you find out that your wife potentially has cheated on you now. Like there's actually in Stalag 17, if I remember correctly, it's the actor playing it in Stalag 17 is actually the author of the original play, Stalag 17, about his wife sending him a letter talking about how she's found this baby, was just left on her doorstep, and you never believe it. Its eyes are just like hers. So what she's actually telling him, and he's just like, I believe it. He's going through saying, I believe it the entire time. But no, what she's actually just told him in a more subtle way is she had an affair, has now had a child, and it has her eyes because it is her child, but not his. So, yeah, that kind of stuff obviously would upset plenty of men quite a bit, and potentially lead them to depression and ultimately suicide. But also this that I highlighted, because this is... It pisses me off, because it is while I can understand it, I also see it as you're wrong. Every camp had its cases of men having opened letters disclaiming any future relationship with, quote, a coward captured by the enemy. I'd like to believe if I would ever witness something like that, I would, if I'm fellow POW, well, that wouldn't ever happen. I would be like, look, she's a bitch. You deserve better than that. You should be thankful. It's gonna suck right now, but let me tell you something. She ain't worth it. If that's what she's thinking, okay? I was like, you were captured, so it's what do you want him to do if he's captured? I mean, it's like even how Coward was captured. He was knocked unconscious when he was captured, and he kept trying to escape. But it's like, what is wrong with you? And if it was on the other side, like I knew her, I depending on how my connection, I might be like, I'm never talking to you again. That is wrong. That is just wrong. I said though, I can understand that idea. That you went over there to be a hero. You're not a hero. You were captured. It's like, no, that can still be very heroic. And even point out, if I continued reading, and irony often shows as recipients of such messages men who had particularly suffered in their last battles. But yeah, I mean, it's just a little bit of an aside now. Because it has occurred to me while I'm reading this, because this is technically nonfiction. It is a biography. Which means that I have to be careful. Because, I mean, yes, I do know, I do recognize I normally am summarizing these things and providing, and just talking about things. But it's kind of hard to be too critical of the story of nonfiction. But there is still a value to this. And similar books to this, I would say, if you're interested in writing, because even though, yes, some of this is going to be dramatized, some of it might be a little condensed, not as much as a movie, but it still is. That's something that maybe you have a situation in your own story that you are writing or want to write, where you realize, hey, you know what? I should actually include that. Because that is real. You might not think of it because you might not. You might have that more romantic idea that no, a woman would never think that, and a woman would never say that. But they did. And it's like, how I said, it pisses me off. It makes me angry that would be a thing. And I would, a woman like that, you're my friend, doesn't matter. Not a friend anymore. Because that's just wrong. It's like, so that can require then that you actively have to think about it to put it in. It doesn't just occur to you because you would reject it. So yeah, now to talk about the two suicides. One is, there were two guys, Shorty and Jock, who the way it was described was that basically these dudes were best friends in the camp. Nothing would separate them, and somehow it was just these two, when they met, they became inseparable. But one day they got into a fight. And it's one of those, people aren't even sure what the fight was about. And Shorty hit Jock and knocked him out. He thought he killed him, though. And this so shattered his psyche. Very much like what is shown in Great Escape, but not quite. He goes right over to the fence and starts climbing it. Now, this is where it differs from the Great Escape. The Germans don't fire for a while. They do, ultimately. They just keep yelling at him to stop. But he keeps going because he wants to commit suicide. He thinks that he's killed his best friend. He didn't, but he thinks he has. So he's just continuing to climb. Keeps going, and eventually they have to shoot him. I mean, to be fair, what else are you going to do? You wouldn't necessarily want a German guard to run up and try to grab and pull him down. You definitely can't let a prisoner do it. So, unless he stops on his own. But it is definitely how it is described there. They did not start off shooting him. That is what you do see in The Great Escape, where when the one guy, I cannot remember the name, when he starts climbing, he doesn't get all the way up. He gets near the top, and then they kill him. But in this, it's like he gets up and actually gets over one fence and gets to the next and is up on that, and that's when they kill him. And then making it worse. But again, it's one of those things, I can understand this. It is wrong, but I do understand it. The Germans kept the body up there for a while. Yeah. because it needed to be a reminder. You don't try to escape. You don't do this. It is horrible. It is wrong, but can be understood. But one thing I also should point out about that. After a few days, the prisoners are able to request it. They take the body down, and it is granted after a few days. So it's like the point was served. But to help put that in different context, I think it was for the slave rebellion in ancient Rome that was led by Spartacus. I think it is the case for this. And for one thing, for the number of slaves they crucified everyone they captured over a road that I don't remember exactly how long it spanned, but it was hundreds of miles. Okay, so literally you walked that way, you rode that way, any of that, the whole distance, and it was like from Rome to the other side of the Italian peninsula. And they had crucified people along the entire length. Okay? And if you watch the movie Spartacus, the classic one with Kirk Douglas, I think they remade it. I have never seen that, but the classic one, yes, what they depict there is true. But what they depict there is also a little different. Well, okay, it's different in two ways. For one thing, I think in the movie they show them being tied instead of nailed, which that was an option. To be clear, that was an option that sometimes Romans would not use nails to pierce you, to crucify you. They would just tie you on there, or would do both. But there's another aspect that is not in that movie. The bodies weren't allowed to be taken down. They rotted off. That would be worse than what's described here. But just the idea of using that kind of symbol is actually quite old. That does make it better, but it is it is old. And yes, there are people that are capable of deciding that is the image that needs to be kept. The other suicide, this guy, what it describes, his name was Patty, which is kind of relevant. He decides he not only wants to commit suicide, he wants to be notable. So the first time he tries, he goes underneath the, like, I don't remember the name of it, but basically, one of the guard towers. And just starts yelling at the German. Just starts trying to insult him, trying to provoke him to shooting. This fails in part because his Irish accent is so thick, the German had no idea what the hell he was saying. So that doesn't work. He then tries hanging himself during a soccer match. When there's thousands of prisoners, they take him down. They stop that. Finally, he disappears for a few days. It's like, what happened? What happened? They finally found him. He climbed into a water tank. And when they found him, he was frozen in the ice. Okay. Now, part of the reason why I'm mentioning all this is because of the next thing that I've highlighted here. Because obviously you do need to dispose of the bodies somehow, and the Germans who share with many an East End housewife the love of a good funeral. Basically, I'm sure it would depend on the camp and who's in command there, but there was respect for the dead. Even though it was enemy dead, you still had respect for them. And so in this case, with the Lambsdorff camp, they were actually allowed to be buried with full military honors at the cemetery in the nearby village. Okay. So what would happen is the British would always make sure that you went out in style. Okay, so they were in their best uniforms, everything polished and all that. And they would be guarded. They would be guarded the whole way there and back. Which, there's something important about that I'll get to in a little bit. But when marching there... Oh, and they also had Scots pipers playing lustily on instruments received from the Red Cross in Geneva. By the way, they have this is... Prior to this, it does mention that they've started getting Red Cross parcels. Which even then, the Germans are doing some stuff to manipulate that. It's not as horrible as that suggests, but things like the Germans have to be the ones to open up the tins, which they would say, oh, that's to prevent hoarding, which potentially could cause some strife, or it's an anti-escape measure because you'd be hoarding the stuff to use when you escape. But it also meant you had to eat it quickly. So they were also controlling when you could eat. But anyhow. Marching to the cemetery, they delivered the Dead March in Saul and other suitable laments. But on their return, they were allowed to play any music of their own choice, with the exception of the British national anthem. That's fair. This was their opportunity, and the villagers were regaled with the stirring strains of Rural Britannia, Land of Hope and Glory, The Blue Bells of Scotland, and a selection of other patriotic pieces. And the thing, it even describes that the villagers actually kind of enjoyed seeing these more or less military parades and would come out and watch. Such that the commandant got upset because the prisoners were looking better than the guards, which is something that comes up later as well. I'll talk about it when we get to that. I don't want to talk about it now, though, because it's a little bit of a spoil. But it is, yeah, even, yeah. Yeah, so the Britishers marching smartly past, brass gleaming, and the kilts of the jocks swirling as well. So, I mean, it's, yeah. Okay. And that would be done for multiple reasons, by the way. One is the very human reason of just, it's something to do. And it is something for you to be, to allow you to be patriotic at a time when you're kind of being crushed for that. But there also definitely would have been the whole just showing up the Germans. You haven't broken us, and let us show you what is great about us, that we will do this. And I can believe that that would also be part of the reason why the Germans would allow that to go on, out of respect. And yeah, because I can just see it as being just out of respect. Anyway, now we're coming to the end. And this is, it does end on a cliffhanger. And I won't spoil it. I know what it is. It's actually, I love what ends up happening. It is in the movie. And it will obviously be in the next chapter. So, a bunch of Canadians have been brought into the camp now. And it doesn't, I'm going to assume it was like the same day. The commandant, an adjutant, and a translator have all come in. And by the way, it also mentions here that this commandant, he was in World War I. He was also POW there. So, by and large, he's described as being a bit softer on the prisoners than others, because he knew what it was like to be one. And this comes up later as well, okay? It is very important to them, okay? It'll make more sense later, when there's a scene that is very, very powerfully about that, okay? But anyway, the reason why those three have now come forward to address the POWs. Let me see. This is what they're reading something off here. The German government has been always mindful of the duty it owes to its prisoners and the obligations imposed upon it by the terms of the international agreement signed by it at The Hague in 1926. Therefore, it has always shown the utmost clemency towards the enemy when captured, and has endeavored to accord them the treatment due to honorably captured prisoners. Yeah, there's some jeering at that, because even for what has already been told to us, there are times that that's not the case. But it is also, this would be, I think that the Hague in 1920, I think that is a well, actually I'm not sure if that is technically Geneva Convention, but it's still, it's the idea of treatment of prisoners under the Geneva Convention would at least encompass this. Like, if you refer to the Geneva Convention, even if this is something separate, you'd still be including stuff from this. Anyway, continuing. But the German government was shocked to note that after the recent abortive enemy raid on the seaport of Dieppe, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, Dieppe, and you can look this up. When Canadian troops attempted to invade the continent and were thrown off by the victorious Wehrmacht, many German soldiers were found shot in the back their hands having been tied behind them. Therefore, the German government has no alternative but to register its horror and concern at this barbarous treatment of its soldiers by making an example not only of the men who perpetrated this terrible crime, remember it was Canadians just brought in, but also the terror gangsters who nightly bomb the beloved fatherland and kill hundreds of innocent women and children. There was a long moment of stunned silence. Then, "Oh Jesus," breathed someone, "they're going to shoot us." And that's how the chapter ends. I know what happens next. The British response to this is really, really good. But this is a real raid. Now, I've looked it up, and because I remember looking at it before, I wanted to look it up again. This raid is very important for multiple reasons. One is, as is described, it was an attempt to invade the continent. It failed, but it allowed the Allies to learn a lot about how you do that. So and there's even a quote somewhere of, I don't remember exactly where it was, I saw it, Churchill basically saying that we won Normandy on the Épée. That they learned so much from that failed attempt. That is what enabled Normandy to succeed. Now, this claim of there being Germans who were bound and shot, from what I can tell, it may have happened. It's unclear because this would absolutely have been stated for propaganda purposes and also exaggerated. It also described that this was when looking it up, it was also very chaotic. So it's possible it happened and maybe accidentally. I don't know. I don't want to read into that, but could have been intentional and could have also just been a few bad Canadians that committed obvious war crimes. It's very much, you don't shoot prisoners of war, period, especially not when they're bound. But it's also the binding. That's a real thing. And that, again, is not good form, at least. I'm not sure if that's I'm not sure if that itself would constitute a war crime. But it's still not really a cool thing to do. So, the story behind that is one of the people on the raid was really stupid. He brought a copy of the orders with him. And he tried to hide it when it was clear he was going to be captured, but he was observed hiding it, so they took it. And it did actually say in there that when you capture the POWs, the Germans, you bind their hands. The reason given is ostensibly to prevent them from destroying documents that they may have on them. But it's still, that's not a good form. That's not good form. It is, yeah. And it's one of the things cited for, crap, what was it called? I left that tab open. The Commando Order. So this was an order that said that basically if any German encountered a commando in Europe, it didn't matter if they were POW, wouldn't matter if they were in full uniform, meaning, and this is important, it is actually depicted in The Great Escape to a degree, when Hiltz is captured and he flashes an insignia like that, he's showing his rank, all right? That would be showing quasi in uniform, but at least like, yeah, I'm not a spy, I'm a captain. I think it was Captain Bars, but in any case. The Commando Order said, it doesn't matter, you kill them. That straight up is war crime, okay? There is no exception to that. And I think technically, although I'm not seeing it mentioned, and I was only skimming, in the Wikipedia page here talking about the Commando Order, and it might have been separate, but in The Great Escape, how it talks about the 46? I don't remember how many of the POWs who had escaped at the end of that, but were captured and then just killed. That would have fallen. That order was at least going to be related to the Commando Order, and that, again, that's a very serious war crime because POWs you don't hurt. Oh, and that also reminds me of something else I wanted to mention. But yeah, these events, the Epee raid did in part lead to Hitler signing that order. And also, by the way, if I remember correctly, the murder, and it was murder, of the escaped, recaptured prisoners that's depicted in The Great Escape, I'm pretty sure I have seen somewhere the order to do that very possibly came directly from Hitler as well. Just, but oh man, it even mentions in the Wikipedia thing here that, yeah, it's like the final paragraph on the introduction. I'll just read that. Shortly after World War II, at the Nuremberg trials, the commando order was found to be a direct breach of the laws of war, and German officers who carried out illegal executions under the commando order were found guilty of war crimes and sentenced to death, or in 2 cases, only 2, extended incarceration. I'm not sure how many of those, because a lot of those sentences were commuted later. In general, for Nuremberg, I'm not sure with that. I could believe that those would have been ones. No, you're not with that. Because that yeah, you don't do that shit. Yeah, it's this is one of those things where I don't recall. It's possible I was and just forgot. I don't recall being taught that, but it's like not only is it talked about in here, just likely, and I think actually in the next chapter we may get more details on the raid itself, and also the claims that the Germans are making. Because as I said or tried to say, were the Germans shot when bound? Possibly. It is very possible, and what I was seeing when I also had asked one of the large language model things, is this true? Duck AI is kind of nice for that. It was basically saying that, yeah, there are historians that are still actively debating this, and there are some who say, yeah, it definitely happened. It's more a question of how severe was it. Was it like, hey, we're like 2 or 3 people, we got a dozen Germans here, what do? We everything crazy going on, kill them, or was it a more planned thing? Or was it accidental even? I mean, that we don't know, and we may never know, because people are dying, records are being lost, records were destroyed, and also some of it was pure propaganda. Okay, I will spoil a little bit about what happens in the next chapter. A little bit, it still leaves you on a little bit of a cliffhanger. What the Germans end up doing is they take all of the prisoners and they bind their hands. They bind them in the camp. Yeah, and also prior to this, let me actually look. Yeah, so this is also like when the Canadians were brought in. They also had a solid wall of grim-faced Germans in full battle order. Every few yards, 2 of them crouched behind Schmesser, I'm probably mispronouncing that, but Schmesser machine guns, and drawn up on the road outside were armored cars. Okay, so it's like they're going to shoot us. It's like they have everything they need to do exactly that. And as I just said, yes, they bind the hands of all the prisoners. Now, there's a British response, and obviously Coward at least does make it through. Charles Coward does make it through this, but yeah, it is a very, very tense situation right there. It's gonna be fun in the next chapter. As I said, I know it is, and it's actually really, really clever. I love what their solution is. But before going too much further with that, I do want to mention Lambsdorff is not just a, hey, we're holding all the prisoners of war here. It's also used as a work camp to a degree. Not in the camp, but they do take work parties out. So it mentions like the Shorty and Jock story, with Shorty committing suicide ultimately. That was something that's described as when Coward got back to the camp after being on a work detail. So he was gone potentially for a while. This story was relayed to him. Okay, so that is also one thing that is interesting, because yes, even under the various conventions, you are allowed to put POWs to work. It depends on what the work is, though. There is some work where no, it wouldn't be allowed. Like I'm pretty sure they're not allowed to be forced to do anything that would contribute to the war effort, directly at least. But if it's something like, hey, we need lumber for rebuilding homes and such, so we're going to set you to cutting down a bunch of trees, or I'm not sure if they would do like POW firefighters, but things like that would be happening. It's not mentioned what he was sent to do, although I did mention in the movie that you do see, and I'm pretty sure it is in the story as well, working at train yards. But I think that might be a little different. I think that's also a later camp that he's at. But in any case, yeah, this got to be a long one. I'm just trying to think because I do kind of want to give something more of an analytical summary here. And I'm just kind of stuck on what I already said earlier, that with some of this stuff, it is worth reading the nonfiction, even if you're only interested in writing fiction, because you might not think of the ways that the depths to which some people will go, the depths that some people find themselves in, both as far as like the suicide attempts described in it, but also, as I said, the whole I can't be connected to a coward that would be captured. It's like they're not cowards, but to think that and then write that in the letter, I mean, it's like that is. That would be legitimately one of those things. I don't know how often I would think about it when writing a story. Now, fortunately, none of my stories thus far would that have come up. But I've got at least one story, 3, I think, that that will involve war in there. So I may have to try to remember that. And one definitely. The story to the book itself will have to span a long period of time, so there would be the notion of POWs and stuff like that. So yeah, I may actually have to make a note of that to include it. That does happen. It's shitty. It shouldn't happen. It's wrong. But it could happen. And I guess if I must defend somebody saying that, because I mean that wouldn't just be women saying it. It's just in this context, it's only women that are saying that. It's the men are in the POW camp. They've left women behind at home. But men could also be this shitty. In the defense of that, it could be they want out. And that's just the excuse they're giving. Because they'd rather say that than, I just don't want to be in this anymore. I don't want to have to wait for you. Which isn't necessarily better, but... No, I take that back. It is better. Because at least that's honest, versus calling somebody a coward who is in such a miserable situation, who is suffering and having to endure that suffering, in part for you, because they want to come back to you. I mean, I think I would even be pushing, like, either just be honest and say you don't want to wait anymore, or, you know what? I would say it's even a little bit more tolerable to lie to them by you moving on, you deciding not to wait for them, but you keep up a correspondence. I could even see that being more tolerable. Potentially. I mean, it depends on what you're doing, but I could see even that being more tolerable, because it's like, look, if nothing else, that man needs a friend. You are that friend. Step up. But yeah, it is a very interesting chapter because of the it has such human elements to it that are discussed there that you're not necessarily going to think about. So read nonfiction stories as well. Okay? Alright. See you next time, when you will find out how the British managed to not get shot. And it is... I think in that chapter, it is more suspected than just the ending there. They're going to shoot us. I think it's even more suspected than that. I don't quite remember, because it's been a while since I read it, but see you next time when we will learn.